Hey everyone, thanks for coming to our YouTube channel and checking out Reunion. Today we are starting a new series called God of Miracles. With Jesus, the impossible becomes possible, and Scripture is full of healing, power, hope, and life. However, it can be hard to believe that miracles can still happen today, or that God even cares about the problems of our lives. And so together in this series, we'll discover that nothing is too hard for Jesus to revive, restore, or redeem. If you are in the Boston area and looking for a community to explore faith with, we invite you to participate with us in Somerville and Davis Square. We would love to meet you. You can find all the details on our website, reunionboston.com. If you have your phone handy, also feel free to scan the QR code using your camera, and it will take you directly to our connection card. Fill out the card and we'll reach out to answer any questions you might have about faith or how it can be a part of our community. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Now here's Nathan as he begins our series, God of Miracles.
Test back. You could have internal bleeding. Your brain could be all full of blood. You think that's good for it? It ain't.
This sucks. This sucks. This sucks.
Are you kidding me? You walked away from a car accident without a scratch. A miracle took place today.
Oh, here we go.
You don't think this was a miracle?
There's no such thing as miracles.
March 2006, McLaren's Bar.
Oh, that's terrible. Gentle.
That's in.
Gentle. Ow.
Here we go.
Whoa. Hey! Bravo.
No way. That did not just happen.
Am I dead? Am I dead?
Miracle!
A pencil went up Barney's nose and you call it a miracle.
Hey everyone, my name is Nathan, and I'm excited to be hanging out with all of you today. If you aren't a fan of the show How I Met Your Mother, let me explain a little bit about what just happened. Now, the show follows a group of 5 friends: Ted, Marshall, Lily, Barney, and Robin. And at the beginning of this episode, Ted innocently is taking a taxi to work, and his taxi happens to get T-boned at an intersection by another car. And it just so happens that Ted gets up and kind of walks away from this accident without a scratch. Now, as you saw, Ted's friend Marshall called it a miracle. But his other friend, Robin, she's a little bit more skeptical. She's not as eager to call it a miracle as Marshall is. And she really highlights this when she looks right at Marshall and says there's no such thing as miracles. Now, obviously, Marshall takes it upon himself to let her know that that's just not true. Miracles do, in fact, happen, which is what brings us to the scene we just saw. But it doesn't stop there. This becomes a theme that happens throughout this entire episode as Marshall tries desperately to convince Robin of all the miracles that have happened in his life. It's a pretty funny sequence as it carries on throughout the show. But let me give you just a short list of what Marshall describes as he recounts the different miracles that have happened in his life. This list includes a TSA shift change that takes place right as he's going through security, as he's flying back, returning from Amsterdam. Now, you might not be able to put together why he thinks that's a miracle, but give it some time or ask someone around you. You'll start to put the pieces together. He talks about a time where he got lice when he was visiting his wife as she was teaching kindergarten. And after he visited his wife, he was going to go back to a place that he hated working, that he was fired from, and beg for his job back. But because he got lice, he didn't end up getting his old job back. And a few weeks after this all happens, the company that he was trying to get his job back at was sued for gross negligence with one of their contracts. And finally, after Marshall tries to convince Robin of all of these miracles, Robin finally shares why she doesn't believe in miracles at all. See, Robin had actually had one miracle happen to her in her life. When she was a little girl, her dog was sick, very sick. In fact, so sick that they thought they were going to have to put the dog down. Except there was one experimental surgery just might be able to save her dog's life. And so they opt for this procedure, and believe it or not, it worked. her dog's life was saved. There was one side effect to the surgery, though. Her dog was turned into a turtle. Apparently, a very common side effect of the surgery, according to her parents. And she admits that after she tells this story, that it took her much longer than she is proud of to realize what had actually happened. And at the end of this episode, as we watch all of this play out, Ted finally is released from the hospital, and he goes to finally meet up with this girl who he had broken up with at the beginning of the episode. And that's where we get really the moral of the story. It's that in his eyes, the real miracle is that the car accident he was in, it made him realize just how much he truly loved his girlfriend. And then in the end, the accident actually got them back together. Miracle. I mean, all of this is really just like, they're very radically different views of the idea of miracle. I mean, what do you think of when you define miracle? And before we go into any further, let me stop and just let's take a look at the definition of a miracle. Because in Webster's dictionary, a miracle is defined as an extraordinary event manifesting as a divine intervention in human affairs. So when we think about this idea of miracles, right, not, some of the casual explanations of miracles that we put out, but this true kind of definition of miracles, it makes me wonder, are we maybe a bit of Marshall? Do you look for miracles everywhere you go, always expecting some kind of miracle to happen, or just assuming everything fortunate that happens to us is just some kind of miracle? I know that there are plenty of church traditions that kind of hold this view. Like maybe you talk to someone like this and something as simple as their car breaking down happens. But when they tell the story goes more like, yeah, my car broke down and I was stranded alone. I was not sure what to do, but then a miracle happened because God sent this mysterious stranger to come, and they were able to fix my car for me. And you sit there and you hear the story and you're like, you broke down next door to a mechanic. Like, that's not a miracle. When we're always looking for miracles, then everything becomes a miracle. But is that really how God works? Or maybe we hold a view like Robin. We just believe miracles don't exist anymore at all. That's a thing that we read about in the Bible, sure. But in truth, that was written by people who had a more primitive worldview than we do. That was written in an age where they didn't understand science like we do. In our enlightened modern thinking, it helps us to see that everything has a scientific explanation. And if something doesn't have a scientific explanation, then it probably didn't actually happen. And when we start thinking about ourselves and these views of miracles and which one we kind of hold more to, then we have to ask ourselves, if everything is a miracle or if nothing is a miracle, why do we bother praying for things that we need? I mean, shouldn't we just assume that God is going to provide a miracle? I mean, after all, that's what he does, right? Or on the other hand, shouldn't we just assume that God doesn't do miracles anymore? So why bother asking for one if God isn't going to intervene? And what do you do with that? What do you do when you are desperate? What do we do when we are hoping and begging that God will do something big in our lives? What do we do when we need a miracle? When our partner tells us that they don't love us anymore, and there is nothing that we can do to change their mind. The only thing that will is a miracle. Or when the person we love is sick, and the doctors say it's going to take a miracle for them to get better. Or when our kids are rebelling, and we have done everything that we can to get them to act better, to walk in the way of Jesus, to not be so angry and not be so hurtful. And it seems like the only thing that is going to change them is a miracle. Or when we heard that there's another round of layoffs coming, and we know that we have to be someone who is vulnerable. And the only thing that can save us is a miracle. I mean, what do we do when we need a miracle in our lives? Do we believe that God has the power to truly, divinely impact our lives today? And even if we do believe that, do we ever wonder if he wants to? I mean, I would guess that many of us believe that God has the power to heal and to restore things and to perform miracles in our lives today. And if we believe that, the question then becomes, is he willing to actually do so? You know, this week we're kicking off a brand new series called God of Miracles. And we want to just take a few weeks and ask the question, does God still work in the lives of his people today? You know, as we look at the stories of Jesus's miracles in the Bible, can and does God truly intervene in our lives like he did back then? What does a modern day miracle look like? Is it something that can actually happen to us? Today, we're going to take a look at a miracle that Jesus performed early on in his ministry. In Luke 5, we find the story of a man who has leprosy, a skin disease, and it still exists today, but it was much more prominent in the ancient Near East. Now, the issue of leprosy went beyond the physical at this time. Because of a lack of treatment and how easily the disease spread, people with leprosy at this time were banished entirely from their community. This isn't just something that would have been isolating and left the person feeling lonely either. I mean, this would have made the person live in complete social isolation and experience societal excommunication, meaning they were not allowed to participate in any of the broader aspects of community, many of which involved participating in worship and practices within the temple. Which really means someone with leprosy would not have been allowed to worship God in the place where God was believed to meet them. They would have felt alone. They would have been truly alone. They also would have been constantly reminded of how alone they were anytime they traveled or came close to community. And this is the type of person we encounter in this story. But look what happens when they encounter Jesus. We'll pick up the story starting in verse 12, where we read, "While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.'" Now, this man, he comes to Jesus and he has nothing to offer Jesus. He doesn't have anything to convince Jesus to heal him. He doesn't show up to Jesus and offer money or tell him how good he's been or start to justify why he came close to Jesus and what made him so bold as to ask for healing. Because it's really interesting. This guy's not even supposed to be here. Now, we should note it's likely that Jesus wasn't kind of in the main hub of the town, but probably was just on the outskirts of town, beginning a journey towards another local community. And the reason that we believe this is that because people with leprosy would not have been allowed in any populated area, meaning this man would have been stopped many times over before he was able to reach Jesus. But it's more than just that they couldn't be with a large group of people. People with leprosy were expected to make sure everyone knew where they were when they were traveling. They had to wear these large bells around their necks to make sure anyone drawing near could hear them and know that they should not approach the person coming towards them on the road. They were also are required to announce their presence if they sensed someone coming close. If they saw someone or they heard someone else on the road while they were traveling, they were required to call out unclean until the other person was able to get to a safe distance. And this is something that would have been required by law. There would have been severe punishments if someone was caught not following these rules. You know, this man, he would have come to Jesus knowing he had nothing to offer him, knowing the risk that he was taking just to be there, knowing that Jesus could have looked at him and wanted nothing to do with it. Maybe that's a feeling some of us have experienced as well. Maybe we don't believe that we have enough worth or enough value for God to even care about us. But this man here, knowing all of that, ignored the rules. He risked everything to draw close to Jesus because something about Jesus made him feel safe to draw near. Something about Jesus made him recognize that Jesus was actually going to draw near to him too. I think that's why he draws near in the first place. And I think it's why he doesn't feel the need to plead his case to Jesus. Because like I said, he doesn't try to convince Jesus to heal him because he understands who Jesus is. And that is what will get him his miracle. His faith is not in who he is, but in who Jesus is. Many of us believe the lie that when we ask God for something, the burden is on us to prove our worth. But this story actually reveals for us the opposite is true. What if, for any miracle to happen, we simply need to make sure we are willing to ask the right person? The way this man frames his question is if you are willing. Meaning this guy understands that what he's asking is a risk. He knows that at the same time, he understands by saying this, if you are willing, that Jesus could have said no. But this man at least has the faith to make the ask. He had the faith that Jesus was capable of offering a miracle in his life. A lot of us have lost that belief. If we lack faith and we don't have the courage to ask, we shouldn't be surprised when we never see our miracle. Because what we see in Jesus' character throughout the rest of this story shows us why Jesus is the one who can provide miracles in our lives. There's actually 3 specific characteristics of Jesus that we see in this story, and they become a reminder for us that God can provide us with what we need. And the first is really simple. Jesus has noticed the man. Like I said, Jesus doesn't ignore him. He doesn't ignore his troubles, his hurt, his pain, his sickness. He wasn't distant or aloof. When the man approached Jesus, Jesus gave him his full attention. God is a God who notices. God is a God who notices us, who draws near to us, who sees and knows what is going on in our lives. Author and theologian A.W. Tozer, in his book, The Pursuit of God, The Human Thirst for the Divine, puts it this way. Always, everywhere, God is present, and always he seeks to discover himself to each one. In our story, God wasn't unaware of what this man needed. God knew exactly what he needed. And the same is true for us. As we sit in our pain, waiting for our miracle, God isn't surprised by our circumstances. When we ask God to heal our loved one or to fix our marriage or to restore our relationship, he isn't shocked. Jesus is fully aware of the specifics of our situation. Nothing we experience surprises him. We read on. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. Now we kind of have to stop here just because of how unbelievable this moment is. Excuse me. At this time, it was extremely taboo for someone to touch a person who had leprosy. So the person with leprosy was considered ceremonially unclean. And like I said before, they were not allowed in the temple or to be with the larger community. So for someone to touch a person who had leprosy would make the person also ceremonially unclean for a season as well. Meaning that if anyone ended up accidentally or intentionally touching a person with leprosy, they would also for a time, be excommunicated from their community. They would not be in contact with anyone. They would have to be forced to live in isolation until the time of their uncleanliness passed. So we might read this and think, oh man, that's really nice of Jesus. But we might miss the gravity of what is actually happening when we settle for that understanding. See, it's likely that this man has not had physical contact with another human for years. It's probable that this man hasn't felt another human being since the time of his diagnosis. In fact, in all likelihood, for most of this man's life, whenever he came into contact with another human being, that person ran the opposite direction. And Jesus could have done that as well. Or Jesus could have offered to heal this man without touching him. I mean, we've seen miracles where Jesus just says the word and someone is healed. But that's not what Jesus does here. People, they never leaned in when this man came near. People never reached out when they encountered this man. People ran, but Jesus reached. Jesus is a reacher. And he didn't just reach out to this man as a physical gesture. He reached into this man's situation. See, when Jesus reached out, he didn't just reach out to show sympathy. He's reaching was something deeper, a more emotional response to what this man was pleading for. He didn't just want to pat him on the shoulder. He reached out to let him know that his situation was seen, that Jesus had the power to reach into his circumstances and truly give him what he was longing for. We are never invisible or forgotten by Jesus. He can reach into any situation and give us exactly what we need. And Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes on, I am willing, he said, be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. Then Jesus ordered him, do not tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priests and offer sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Yet the news about him spread all the more, so the crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sickness. Jesus doesn't stop at noticing this man. He doesn't just lean in to comfort the man either. It goes beyond that. He heals him. And he not only heals this man of his leprosy, the healing that Jesus offers is holistic. He restores him back to the society. Why does Jesus send him to the priest? Well, the priest is the one who can declare to the community that this man is now clean. The priest would have been the one to restore him back to society. It's really interesting. Jesus also makes this man offer sacrifices that Moses instructed. We find those instructions in Leviticus 14. But for those sacrifices, 2 birds would have been used, and 1 bird would have been killed while 1 bird would have lived. And the blood of the first bird, the sacrificial bird, would have been mixed with water, and the living bird would then kind of been dipped into the blood water mixture, representing a cleansing with blood, and it would have been released and set free. And then the man who had leprosy himself would have been sprinkled with the blood water mixture too. He's like the living bird. See, the man, like the bird, would have gone free after that. Well, the blood of the sacrificed bird would have been what made that possible. See, in this very act, this man would have begun to get a clearer picture of how Jesus cleanses him. And we too, from the story, get a clear picture of how Christ cleanses us. He heals this man spiritually by allowing him to experience the gospel. I mean, there is absolutely nothing this man could have done to heal himself from his leprosy. He could have cleaned and washed and performed every cleansing rite and ritual known to him, and it never would have healed him. So this man makes a decision that he is going to run to the one who can heal him. He goes to the man who does have the power to provide him the miracle that he needs. Jesus was willing to perform the miracle that this man needed. And more than that, because after this man is healed, he can't help but tell people what's happened. And because of that, more and more people show up to Jesus to see if he will heal them as well. And he does. That's what Jesus tends to do. Jesus is a healer. And he heals the people who run to him and ask him to do something great in their lives. He is willing and able to perform the miracle we need in our lives. And no matter how great our need is, no matter how great our problem or dilemma or hurt might be, we are a candidate to experience a miraculous move of God. See, what Jesus did for this man, I believe he can do for us, because at the root, miracles are one way that God restores things. You know, for many of us, we think of miracles as God doing something that should not have been done because he has favor with someone or because he loves someone. But that doesn't seem to be what miracles really are when we look at Scripture. In fact, in his book, The Reason for God, Tim Keller argues that miracles are God's way of putting things back to how they were intended to be. Keller writes this: "We modern people think of miracles as the suspension of the natural order, but Jesus meant them to be the restoration of the natural order. The Bible tells us that God did not originally make the world to have disease, hunger, and death in it. Jesus has come to redeem where it is wrong and heal the world where it is broken. His miracles are not just proofs that he has the power, but also wonderful foretaste of what he is going to do with that power. Jesus' miracles are not just a challenge to our minds, but a promise to our hearts that the world we all want is coming. This is the miracle of the gospel. That Jesus has been at work restoring the world to how it was intended to be. The beautiful perfection that the world was intended to be, heaven in the present moment. The whole of the gospel is the work of this miracle. It's about restoring things to how they should be, restoring our lives and our families and our world. The gospel is at work restoring everything to how it should be. And the hope of the gospel is that one day that restoration will be complete. No longer will it be about the gospel restoring things. It will have fully restored them. And every time we live into the gospel right now, every time we align our lives with the way of Jesus, we get a glimpse of the miracle that will one day be a reality. If we believe that God is still at work in the world today, if he notices, if he still reaches, if he still heals, then God is still able to perform the miracles that we need in our lives today. So let me ask, what miracle do you need today? And as we're thinking about that, I want to make a couple quick notes on miracles. Because I think we need to acknowledge when I say that God is still at work doing miracles today, I don't mean that God is interested in doing magic tricks. Many of us, we don't want a miracle like we read about in the Bible. We want a miracle that's going to result in our greater comfort. See, biblical miracles follow the pattern that we just talked about. Miracles were a way of eradicating the brokenness and the sinfulness and the pain of the world. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, if you came up to me and told me that you bought a lottery ticket and you're praying for a miracle, I'd tell you that's not a miracle. Miracles are not about our comfort. They're about God's glory and his kingdom coming to earth. Are we asking for something that is important to God? Are we seeking a miracle that advances our purposes or something greater than ourselves? And also, I think we just have to note that Jesus didn't heal everyone. When Jesus lived his life, and at the end of it, there were still sick people around him. Sometimes we don't ask for the right thing, or sometimes God knows better what we need than we do ourselves. Sometimes not getting what we want is actually what's going to help grow our faith the most. Maybe sometimes we need to understand the miracle is actually us not getting what we ask for. In truth, though, the man in our story, he didn't sit idly by and hope for a miracle. He went to the one who could provide it. And if we want a miracle, we need to do the same. What is holding us back from praying that prayer? Lord, if you are willing, you can. Are we afraid of what might happen? Are we unwilling to sacrifice in ways that might make this miracle come to fruition? Do we doubt that God can do this? Do we doubt that God cares enough to do this? And this week, maybe we just need to take time to prayerfully release whatever is holding us back and wait expectantly for God to move. Maybe what we need is right around the corner. And if we would just be willing to ask, if we would just have the faith to believe that God could give us what we truly need, maybe we would just see miracles happen before our eyes. Hey, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm going to send things back to Matt as he closes our time together with a benediction.
Let's close with our benediction. In anxiety, may you find peace. In sadness, may you find comfort. In sickness, may you find healing. In loneliness, may you find company. In busyness, may you find space. In listening, may you find wisdom. In following, may you find hope in the one who meets our needs. And now, as you go from this place, may the God who hears be ever present to you, continuing to breathe a breath of hope into your broken places, so that healing and hope might flow through you and into the world. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Go in peace and live the church.